The house lights burned white as the livestream counter spiked, and Alex Carter said, "Today we change everything." A red banner cut across the jumbo screen like a wound, and the feed turned hostile in a blink. Maya Brooks said, "Alex, something's wrong," as phones lit up row by row. A headline screamed about falsified metrics, and the crowd inhaled as one organism. Alex said, "Those numbers are real," but doubt hissed louder than the stage monitors. In the VIP box, Victor Hale watched like a man measuring a trophy case. Ethan Cole was nowhere near the wings, and that absence felt like a verdict. Alex said, "We'll address this now," but his mic trembled against dry lips. The clickstorm rose like hail on a tin roof, and the narrative slipped from his hands. Somewhere a camera zoomed, hunting for the precise moment a dream cracked. The boardroom smelled like old coffee and panic, and Daniel Price said, "Explain the variance before noon." Alex Carter said, "The feed was manipulated, not the product," and his words tried to outrun the clock. Ben Ortiz said, "We need a statement grounded in verifiable logs," and he slid a folder across the glass. Maya Brooks said, "Priya is pulling the control room footage now," and hope sounded like a thin wire. A director said, "Markets open in 20, and the wall screens coughed red." Alex said, "We face this head on, no spin," and the chairs creaked like doubts waking up. Daniel said, "Integrity is costly, but lies are fatal," and he held the room still. Alex said, "Then we pay the cost," and chose the hardest path. Outside the tower, wind pressed headlines against legs, and a reporter said, "Did you inflate metrics?" Alex Carter said, "No, and we'll show the audit," while flash pops stitched the sidewalk. Maya Brooks said, "Stay center, keep moving," and her hand found his elbow like a lighthouse. Another voice said, "Your partner vanished. Why now?" And the question sliced him thinner than the coal. Alex said, "We will answer when the logs are processed," and he felt the truth gather weight. A rival ad truck rolled by with Victor Hale's logo, and the timing felt surgical. Alex said, "We build, we own the mistake, we fix it," and kept his eyes on the door. The crowd surged, and the glass spun open like a reprieve. The apartment buzzed with unread alarms, and Alex Carter said, "One disaster at a time," as he set his keys beside a sagging plant. His inbox looked like a riot, and the subject lines argued in capital letters. Laura Carter said, "Come home for a week," and the invitation felt like a soft exit sign. Alex said, "If I leave now, it dies," and he watched the cursor blink like a dare. Priya Shah said, "Found anomalies in booth access logs," and the room tilted toward purpose. Ben Ortiz said, "Chain of custody first," and the legal tone steadied his pulse. Alex said, "We document, we publish, we take the hit," and the decision cut clean. Outside, sirens braided with the city's low, patient hum. Before sunrise, the roof breathed cold metal and promise, and Alex Carter said, "You can break my name, not my work." The skyline held its breath, and the first train stitched light along the river. Maya Brooks said, "We're not alone in this," and the words landed like anchors on a drifting deck. Alex said, "We tell the whole truth, even if it burns," and the dawn answered with a thin gold edge. He pictured Victor Hale counting outcomes, and Ethan Cole fading into locked rooms. Alex said, "We rebuild in daylight," and the vow tasted like iron. Somewhere below, a door clanged, and the city shrugged, awake. He set his phone to record, and began drafting the confession they would own. The kitchen smelled like scorched toast and rain, and the clock stuttered between heartbeats as emails piled like snowdrifts. Maya Brooks said, "We survived the ambush, not the day." Alex Carter said, "I need one person to believe, start with you." Maya said, "I believe in the work, not myths, so prove the work." Alex said, "Then help me separate faith from facts before they calcify." She spun the laptop and the access logs marched like footprints through wet sand. Maya said, "Ethan missing is a pattern, not proof, so treat it carefully." Alex said, "Patterns point the way when the air is thick with spin." Maya said, we publish the ugly parts first or nothing else lands. Alex said, we lead with failure, then show the fix, no varnish. The kettle clicked off, and the steam wrote brief hope on cold glass. Maya said, eat, then fight, and a plan formed between mugs and margins. Laura's living room held the soft weight of family photos and unasked questions, and Laura Carter said, come stay a week before this chews you up. Alex Carter said, if I leave now, the story writes itself without me. Laura said, your story is not a hashtag, it is a life, try keeping it. Alex said, lives bend when we run, and I am done running. Laura said, you can fight clean, or let it stain you until you forget who you are. Alex said, clean means we confess what hurts and face the fines. She crossed her arms and watched the ticker scroll doom across a muted screen. Laura said, I will not watch you drown for pride. Alex said, it is not pride, it is repair. She sighed and handed him a house key anyway. Laura said, use it when the fight ends, or when you break. Ben Ortiz stacked documents like bricks, and the conference room glass threw back 2 tired faces and 1 hard choice. Ben Ortiz said, chain of custody, or the truth will bleed out on cross. Alex Carter said, we lock every artifact and sign every handoff. Ben said, then we publish logs unedited, names redacted, methods intact. Alex said, we will get sued anyway. Ben said yes, but we will not be liars and courts respect spine. Alex said, the board wants relief, not sermons. Ben tapped a paragraph, and the paper thudded like a gavel. Ben said, if you spin, I resign and issue my own statement. Alex said, keep your pen, we are doing this straight. Ben said, good, then hire an external auditor today and give them teeth. The storage room smelled like dust and old ambition, and Priya Shah said, these boxes are from the first office. Alex Carter slit a taped lid and found a folder labeled with an early logo and a younger signature. Priya said, what is it? Alex said, a memo I wrote during my internship at Hale Dynamics. The pages warned about unsecured vendor tokens, and the names rhymed with today's disaster. Priya said, the same exploit, different decade. Alex said, and the review was denied by Victor's team back then. Priya said, this is not proof of sabotage, but it is a roadmap. Alex said, it changes the question from who to how, and why again. Dust motes swam as the past reached forward with ink on cheap paper. Grace Lynn chose a table by the window where the city poured past like proof that time does not wait, and she stirred tea with a measured hand. Grace Lynn said, I mentor builders, not fugitives. Alex Carter said, I am here to build inside the light. Grace said, then publish an autopsy before a pitch deck. Alex said, we have one forming, and it will hurt. Grace said, pain is tuition, pay it clean. He watched pedestrians weave and imagined a life not hiding from glass. Grace said, 3 conditions. Outside audit, radical disclosure, and no deals that gag the truth. Alex said, agreed, even if it costs me the company. Grace said, it may cost less than your soul. He nodded, and the tea went cold while resolve warmed. The freeze notice hit like sleet, and the dashboard dimmed, as if the room exhaled loss. Maya Brooks said, payroll is locked for 72 hours. Alex Carter said, then I cover it, we do not miss a paycheck. Ben Ortiz said, do not commingle, file an emergency petition now. Alex said, we wire vendors for core, uptime and pause everything else. Maya said, CDN threatens shut down by noon if invoices bounce. Ben said, we can seek a temporary restraining order before that clock. Alex said, get me a declaration template and I'll sign every line. Maya said, ops will run a skeleton plan, but morale will bleed. Ben said, we publish status with receipts, not adjectives. Alex said, no spin, only facts, and I will own the fall. The room held its breath, and then moved. The flagship client's lobby smelled like polished stone and decisions already made. A director said, "We are exploring alternatives." Alex Carter said, "You mean Victor Hale has your signature ready?" The director said, "He guaranteed uninterrupted service and risk coverage." Alex said, "We guarantee truth, which starts rough and ends reliable." Maya Brooks said, "Offer migration tooling, not a discount." Alex said, "We will migrate you free and publish every cell A metric." The director said, "Our board wants quiet, not headlines." Alex said, "Silence is brittle, transparency bends and holds." The elevator chimed, and Victor stepped out like a verdict. Victor Hale said, "We can sign upstairs." Alex said, "Choose speed or spine, but know which lasts." The door swallowed them, and the marble kept its shine. The smear started as a whisper, and grew teeth by lunch. Ethan Cole said, "I saw corners cut for growth in a clipped podcast tease that looped like a snare." Alex Carter said, "Show code, not gossip," and the team watched comments bloom like mold. Maya Brooks said, "We answer with artifacts, not anger." Ben Ortiz said, "Preserve every post and send a litigation hold." Alex said, "Draft a thread with commit history and dates." Maya said, "Screenshots, reproducible steps and signatures." Ethan said, "Users were misled, and the host made a face for the clip." Alex said, "We owned the failure and the fix. That is the path." The graph of mentions spiked like fever, and resolve steadied beneath the noise. Daniel Price set the term sheet between them like a scalpel. Daniel Price said, "I cannot defend capital until the audit lands clean." Alex Carter said, "The auditor is retained and has full access." Daniel said, "Cut burn by half and trade speed for certainty." Alex said, "We will shrink to the truth and ship only what survives." Daniel said, "Walk away from vanity metrics and rented growth." Alex said, "I will measure by durable revenue and open artifacts." Daniel said, "Then this money waits, not vanishes." Alex said, "I will earn it back with daylight." Daniel nodded once, the hardest mercy he could give. The silence felt surgical, but it did not bleed him out. Night wrapped the lab in humming vents and hope. Priya Shah said, "I found a cadence in the access noise, every third Tuesday at 2:14. Alex Carter said, "Correlation invites traps, show me the chain." Priya said, "Hash collision, same proxy family, and a handshake that mirrors the conference feed." Alex said, "Map it to vendor tokens and timebox every breach." Priya said, "The pattern overlaps with Victor's rollout announcements." Ben Ortiz said, "Document sources, seal originals, and log witnesses." Maya Brooks said, "Package it for the auditor with reproducible scripts." Alex said, "This is a thread we pull until the sweater comes off." The monitors blinked like beacons, and the room felt less alone. The lab lights hummed like nerves, and the timeline lined up with a cruel sort of rhythm. Priya Shah said, "These admin pings come from inside our network. I will know." Alex Carter said, "So the lock was opened with our own key." Maya Brooks said, "Which means trust is now evidence." Priya said, "Two devices, same fingerprint, different users, same midnight window." Alex said, "Cross them with badge readers and freight elevator logs." Priya said, "Matches a contractor ID that only appears on demo nights." Maya said, "That is either a ghost or a guide." Alex said, "Pull CTV and correlate the elevator stall." Priya said, "Already queued, checksum verified." Maya said, "If this is real, we expose it even if it guts us." Alex said, "Truth costs less than slow rot," and the room leaned into the screen. The co-working conference room smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh paper, and the spreadsheets formed a trail with missing planks. Ben Ortiz said, "Shell 1 invoices, Shell 2, both paid by a donor account." Priya Shah said, "The donor traces to an LLC with Ethan Cole as manager." Alex Carter said, "And Victor Hale is the beneficial owner downstream." Ben said, "It is legal camouflage, not proof of collusion yet." Priya said, "The payment cadence matches our breach nights." Alex said, "Then cadence is our lever." Ben said, Subpoenas can pry, but the clock will punch back. Priya said, we publish the structure and invite scrutiny. Alex said, no accusation, only architecture. Ben said, do that, and the right eyes may finish the map. The Riverwalk held a slow wind that cleaned the mind, and traffic hummed like distant commentary. Grace Lynn said, power does not fight fair, it hires patience. Alex Carter said, I am tired of being outweighted. Grace said, then change the game, not the ethics. Alex said, we plan an autopsy before a pitch like you said. Grace said, and you accept that friends may flee the light. Alex said, if they flee, they were never ballast. Grace said, you will be tested when the numbers turn kind again. Alex said, that is where I choked before. Grace said, publish cadence, publish context, and never bargain with silence. Alex said, I will stitch the facts into a lantern, and the water took the promise downstream. The legal war room looked like a storm held in binders, and the printer sighed between volleys. Ben Ortiz said, if we go public with the structure, prepare for injunctions by breakfast. Alex Carter said, we answer with backup signatures and a read-only vault. Ben said, also prepare for personal attacks and a dig at your internship past. Alex said, we own the past before they bend it. Ben said, then we file whistleblower protections for Priya and Ops. Alex said, shield the team before the blast. Ben said, media strategy must avoid adjectives and stay inside artifacts. Alex said, we speak in receipts, not rage. Ben said, this hurts before it heals. Alex said, healing is not the point. Integrity is, and the plan clicked into place. The map on the wall looked like a web that finally admitted it was one. Maya Brooks said, this is not a feud, it is an ecosystem feeding on fog. Alex Carter said, then we burn the fog with process and daylight. Priya Shah said, I can ship a public ledger of every fix and failure. Ben Ortiz said, pair it with a narrative of duty, not vengeance. Alex said, we invite audit, we invite critique, we invite repair. Maya said, and we prepare for the hit on revenue. Alex said, revenue bends, trust cracks and stays cracked. Priya said, the cadence will hold if leadership does. Alex said, leadership begins with this choice now. He pinned the last thread, and the war turned into work. The garage smelled like solder and rain, and folding tables became a company again. Alex Carter said, one product, one promise, no garnish. Maya Brooks said, then define the promise in 10 words. Alex said, secure data, visible truth, no silent failure. Priya Shah said, telemetry first, features second, debt last. Ben Ortiz said, document licenses before code touches prod. Alex said, every commit links to an artifact and a receipt. Maya said, I own ops, budgets and hiring freeze rules. Alex said, then I own customers and roadmaps. Priya said, I will demo crash paths before happy paths. Ben said, good, pain first. The rain eased, and the garage felt wide enough for a future. The prototype booted like a held breath released. Priya Shah said, crash harness armed, inject the fault now. Alex Carter said, here comes the spike. Maya Brooks said, timers live, streaming logs to the public bucket. The graph wobbled, dipped and steadied like a heart that learned. Priya said, failover hit in 240 milliseconds. Aywa. Alex said, faster than our last quarter by half. Maya said, alert copy is plain and brutal, just how we promised. Priya said, no ghosts, only recorded pain. Alex said, ship this into a sandbox for a friendly client. The room cheered small, like people who know the climb is long. Morning stand-up circled a taped rectangle on the floor like a ring. Maya Brooks said, we run small, fast, and audited. Alex Carter said, each task needs an owner and a receipt. Priya Shah said, I will maintain the public incident ledger. Ben Ortiz said, I will vet copy for liability without blunting facts. Maya said, no slackers, no tourists, no egos. Alex said, we invite critics to test in daylight. Priya said, feature flags protect users from our learning. Ben said, and disclaimers protect truth from lawyers. Maya said, metrics that matter, recovery time and churn only. Alex said, then let's earn those numbers. The rehearsal room carried the quiet of rooms where chances shrink. Daniel Price said, start with the wound, then the cure. Alex Carter said, we failed by trusting darkness, now we measure light. Daniel said, numbers, not poetry. Alex said, recovery in 240 milliseconds and churn trending down. Daniel said, defend the moat without hype. Maya Brooks said, moat is culture enforced by public ledgers. Daniel said, who pays for virtue when speed is cheaper? Alex said, customers who live with audits and fines. Daniel said again, and sharper. Alex said, we sell trust that outlasts panic. Daniel let the silence grade the answer. Night brought the launch of a site that felt like a confession sung in code. Alex Carter said, we flip the strategy now. Maya Brooks said, homepage leads with our worst day. Priya Shah said, then the ledger of fixes, open APIs, and raw logs. Ben Ortiz said, add plain disclaimers and a subpoena policy. Alex said, we invite audits, critics, and competitors to read us. Maya said, marketing becomes changelogs and postmortems. Priya said, every outage gets a timer and a lesson. Ben said, this will sting, then pay. Alex said, let it sting. Publish button clicked and the room felt taller. The summit hall glowed like a verdict chamber, and the countdown clock drummed in ribs. Alex Carter said, we demo in daylight, faults included. Victor Hale said, or you implode on stage again. Maya Brooks said telemetry is live in public. A murmur rippled as the incident banner armed itself like a dare. Alex said, injecting failure now, and the graph dove then found its feet. Victor said, pretty graphs do not carry risk. Alex said, receipts do, and he opened the raw logs to the wall. The room leaned forward as alerts spoke plain and cold. Alex said, this is how truth behaves under pressure, and silence felt like a nod. Backstage smelled like cables and adrenaline, and the door latch clicked like a gavel. Ethan Cole said, you finally learned optics. Alex Carter said, I learned custody. Priya Shah said, your contractor badge cloned the admin token. Ethan said, you cannot prove intent. Alex said, we can prove cadence and cash. Priya said, your LSC pays the shell that pays the breach nights. Ethan said, business is messy, not criminal. Alex said, messy does not hide inside our walls. He set the evidence binder down, and its weight altered the air. A glass conference room overlooked the city like a jury box, and contracts waited with sharp edges. Daniel Price said, integrity or nothing. Alex Carter said, we choose integrity even if we lose. Daniel said, funding follows audits that bite. Alex said, auditor owns the keys, not me. Daniel said, you publish every outage within an hour. Alex said, and every fix with diffs and signatures. Daniel said, board seats require moral spine, not access. Alex said, seat them and let them refuse darkness. Daniel nodded once, and the deal became possible. The atrium pulsed with cameras, and a truth map filled a wall like an X-ray. Ben Ortiz said, we allege structure, not motive, and he anchored the language. Alex Carter said, we publish artifacts, redactions, and chain of custody. Priya Shah said, here is the cadence that matches breach nights. A reporter said, are you accusing Victor Hale? Alex said, we accuse the pattern and invite the law. Ben said, evidence lives in the vault, read only, and time-stamped. The microphones crowded closer, and the past began to loosen its claws. Night returned like a witness, and paper met pen in a room that suddenly felt larger. Daniel Price said, escrow funds release when the audit clears. Alex Carter said, and disclosures stay public forever. Daniel said, this is the price of trust. Alex said, cheaper than rot. A notification rolled across the glass, and Victor Hale's stock slid like wet stone. Maya Brooks said, the market heard the cadence. Alex said, we keep building under the same light. The signatures dried, and an empire lost its shine. Morning slid across glass and checklists as if the building itself had exhaled. Alex Carter said, guardrails are not shackles, they are speed. Maya Brooks said, then we codify them and live by them. Priya Shah said, the public ledger rotates keys weekly and signs every release. Ben Ortiz said, and every statement cites an artifact, not a mood. Daniel Price said, cash follows cadence, keep this cadence. Alex said, we will measure recovery, churn and trust earned per day. Maya said, I will publish burn and runway without varnish. Priya said, I will invite strangers to break our sandbox. Ben said, risk belongs to everyone, not just legal. Alex said, we start with gratitude, then we ship. Folding chairs creaked like old ships, as neighbors settled and phones dimmed. Alex Carter said, we failed publicly, so we report publicly. A teacher said, why should we trust you again? Alex said, because you can verify, not because I ask. Maya Brooks said, our incident ledger is open and written in plain language. Priya Shah said, here is how a bad night becomes a better morning. Ben Ortiz said, we allege structures, not monsters, and hand the rest to the law. A shop owner said, will you serve small clients, not just giants? Alex said, we price for audits, not vanity, and we will show our costs. The room softened like ice under sun, not melted, but moving. The diner smelled like oranges and coffee, and the windows framed a patient noon. Laura Carter said, I pushed you to quit because I was scared. Alex Carter said, I heard love is doubt and wore it like armor. Laura said, I wanted a brother, not a headline. Alex said, I want that too, and I can make room. She slid a small envelope across Formica and looked away. Laura said, it is the key if you need a pause, not a surrender. Alex said, I will use it for a meal, not an escape. She laughed like a door unsticking in spring. Laura said, then let me volunteer at the next town hall. Alex said, welcome to the work. The park held a winter hush that made every word ring longer. Grace Lynn said, you won a round, not the right to coast. Alex Carter said, I will earn it again tomorrow. Grace said, teach before you forget how it felt to be lost. Alex said, I will publish playbooks and invite the next builder to break them. Grace said, when praise returns, beware the old hunger. Alex said, I keep the ledger as a mirror, not a trophy. Grace said, good, then one more condition. Alex said, name it. Grace said, mentor someone who will never thank you on stage. Alex nodded, and the bare trees looked almost like handwriting. Dawn found the rooftop the way a letter finds a name, and the river stitched silver where night had been. Alex Carter said, I thought losing everything would end me, but it started me. He set the phone to record and watched fog loosen from steel. Alex said, I will build in daylight even when it burns my eyes. The city answered with horns and early trains. Alex said, for anyone standing in ash, measure, confess, repair, repeat. A gull tilted like punctuation over concrete. Alex said, truth is the product, the rest is packaging. He breathed, and the horizon wrote one thin line that felt like forever.